Hello, I'm Prieto with Egon Zehnder. We've partnered with the Latino Corporate Directors Association to produce a series of interviews highlighting the success stories of top Latino leaders. Joining us today is Joe Alvarado. Joe is a former chairman and chief executive officer of Commercial Metals Corporation. Just to start the conversation, it'd be great to understand a little bit about your last role as a CEO, and also as a part of that, understand a bit about your journey.
Sure. Well, thank you first for inviting me to do this. My last role, active role as a CEO, was with a company called Commercial Metals Company. I was brought in because I had background in operations and steel businesses, and the company was struggling. The tough part about the job was about 11 days after I took over as CEO, I had to come to New York City to deal with a fellow by the name of Carl Icahn. So my first job as the CEO was to rally the troops and get them to understand that the wolf was at the door, and that's literally the way that we described it. We improved our performance, the activists went away, and that allowed us to start building the company into what it was when I left.
Well, Joe, what you described, not an easy challenge, but you described it as something that you felt like you'd built up to in your career.
I like to tell everyone that I've only known one business, and that's the steel business. And I say that because I grew up in a steel town, East Chicago, Indiana, where my dad worked at the steel plant. He worked in the melt shop. As many Hispanics at the time, or specifically Mexicans, they were always put in the melt shop, and so he worked hard and provided a good living for our family and created opportunities for my sister and I. I was a finance and accounting graduate from the business school at Cornell University, Johnson School.
But it's a long way from East Chicago to where you went to graduate school.
Yep.
to your career.
It played a huge role. My parents, and I point to my dad as being hardworking, and he worked in steel mill, but my mom was equally hardworking. My mom and dad opened a restaurant in East Chicago, Indiana, and a Mexican food restaurant in 1955 was pretty novel and pretty unique. They did well. It was my mother who drove that, and my mother who was who really was the president of that business. If my dad was chief of procurement and materials, my mom was the CEO of that business. So I feel like I had good teaching and good discipline.
What are your perspectives on diversity in its broadest sense, cultural, experiential, in the boardroom, mm-hmm. and what companies can and should do in order to position themselves best for the market of the futures?
As I think back about my career, early on, there wasn't much diversity in the boards that I mentioned, and other than principally white males who were directors. That started to change. I knew that on the board that I was responsible for, the Commercial Metals Board, that we needed to strive to continue to diversify. So Commercial Metals Company, at the end of my tenure, had two female directors, one African-American director. The world is changing around us, the country is changing around us, and the more that boardrooms and management teams reflect the general population, the more that those companies will be able to connect with their constituents. One of the things that made it actually easier for us is that we were a Texas-based company, and a large part of our employee base is Hispanic. So we had an incentive to reflect in the management team some of the diversity that we had in our own workforce.
So, looking forward then, what advice would you give to Latino executives that aspire to be on a board?
I hate to say be patient because it's really not fair, but I point to the fact that everything is evolutionary and some things take longer than others, and there's a need to network and to bring together buyers and sellers, if you will, in the marketplace of corporate talent. And so I give great credit to the founders of the LCDA and the board, which is really focused on trying to marry all those activities of development and networking.